Welcome to History 2323, Lecture 5 on the second theme of the Gilded Age, Urbanization, the Age of the City. America in 1800 had approximately a population of 5.3 million people in the entire country. In 1900, there was 5.3 million people in a single city. So this shows you again the change from rural to urban that was taking place, especially during the Gilded Age. In the pre-industrial city, what I call the traditional city, basically nothing was turned into a product yet as a factory. It was going to be a commercial extract economy. The place to live was along the wharf, whether it was the river or a great lake or the ocean. Generally speaking, you moved around the city by walking. There would be some animals as well, but a lot of it's just called a walking city. And then for the buildings, and most of them were 4 or 5 stories. That was the max because they didn't have steel yet. You have vertical segregation, but it was the shop owners would live right above their shops, and the poor would live at the very highest part. This was due in part to the fact that there were no elevators yet. But in the Gilded Age period, you start seeing the transition from the pre-industrial city to the modern industrial one. And it's 2 factors that I like to stress. Industry and factories caused cities to grow, and mass transit allowed cities to grow. So factories increased because there was lots of immigrants coming in to do cheap labor. Farmers, as we talked a lot about, cities and factories developing machinery, but so did farms. And so fewer and fewer farmers were needed. So you have farmers coming to the city looking for work, and then African Americans would be coming. Those who could leave the South could come up also and find a new start as a worker in a factory. So the raw materials now are being turned in these factories into goods that will again be part of the market, shipped to marketplaces around the country. The mass transit component, you can read through these without too much difficulty, but it starts very simply. Basically, it's an omnibus like a modern day taxi. Only the well-to-do could afford to use. I think it held somewhere between 12 and 12 or so people and a couple horses. There was no direct routes, stuff like that. Eventually, the routes become more standardized. That's why you have railways and horses pulling the street railway. The cars or the coaches, which now are up to 24 passengers. Cable cars, also called streetcars, are developed by Halliday. Trolleys are developed by Stephen Dudley Field in the 1880s. And then when electric streetcars go underground, they become subways. So the first subway system will be in Boston. But our mass transit system takes a big hit when Model Ts will surge onto the scene, and eventually everyone will prefer their own car rather than using mass transit. And that, if you travel through Europe or elsewhere, you'll see that Americans use far fewer Americans use mass transit than elsewhere in the world. Results of this big change with the growth of the cities. And remember, with each of these stages, I should have said something about the mass transit. From the omnibus through the electrical streetcars, subways, and then the Model Ts, you keep on getting bigger and bigger. So what's called horizontal segregation will set in. So the new industrial city is born. Skyscrapers are one of the symbols of it. Also, you've realized that you need to have parks, but this is where stores and bridges like, they are architectural wonders, road construction, housing for the poor. One of the quote unquote reform plans was building these tenements, which were supposed to have more open air and stuff like that by James Ware. But putting masses of people together in small confined areas had all kinds of consequences that they didn't foresee. So population density will increase, and then many Americans were unaware of the problems in the tenement areas. And so Jacob Riis will be one of these muckrakers, as they're called. You'll see why later in another topic. We'll talk about muckrakers, but he will create a book, and then the key will be flash photography has just come into existence. So he'll go around and start taking pictures of people living in these tenements, and that's going to expose some of the problems that were going on there, and lead to more reform. So this is again another theme in the Gilded Age. This concludes Lecture 5 overview.